Hey everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on ParanormalZoneTV. Happy New Year everyone, and thank you all for being with us tonight. And for those who may be new to the show, if you would please subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And tonight you're going to love the show. I am so excited. My guest is Paul Amirault, and he is the author of The Man Who Sent the SOS. And I'm just thrilled to have him on the show. You know, we us out there, we love anything to do with the Titanic, and his story is going to be absolutely amazing. And I want everybody to listen carefully. And Paul is going to share his absolute fabulous story with us. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, you're welcome, Noreen. I really appreciate you having me here.
Now, Paul, I have a lot of questions for you,
Sure.
But before we start, would you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am a television producer by trade. I usually work in the background producing crime shows for like the ID Network or Bio Network. Right now I'm working for the Oxygen Network on a new 1-hour crime show. So every week we do a different hour on a different story. So that's basically what I do during the day. And, there's a lot of, producing's a lot of writing. So I sort of write and rewrite. And that gave me the gumption to say, you know what, I'm going to share this story that I have.
And please, okay, so with that, I want you to share your story with us. I want to know from the beginning. Now, I also read on your website, and I did post your website, you found out that you can heal, you have energy that can heal. What happened there?
There's, it's almost like those are two stories. Let me tell you about the energy healing. Both of these sort of paranormal experiences that I have, one, seeing this past life on Titanic, came out of my work. And the energy healing did too, because I was developing a TV show. I had gotten to the point where I was executive producing, and I figured, hey, this would be a cool show. Let's do a psychic medium show. Like, can we teach ordinary people to be psychics? That was what my thinking was. And so I contacted the school, and they said, yeah, we'd love to do it, and we want you to take part. So I ended up having to go through it, and I found myself really gifted in that. It was not what I expected. So that is the subject of my second nonfiction book that I'm writing. But I think we're mostly here to talk about the first one.
Right. And okay, what happened? What brought you to your going to have a past life regression? Were you had visions? Were you dreaming? What was happening to you?
Well, the thing is that it actually happened because of work. I was working on a paranormal show for ABC. It was called Put to the Test. And it was actually kind of a cynical show. We contacted people who were mediums or dowsers, and we said, hey, we want to basically conduct a test to see if you can do what you say you can. So my job on that show was the head of research. I was the director of research. So it was a really hard show to book. And my boss wanted us to research reincarnation. And I knew enough about the subject to think, I don't know, how can you prove that? If the information exists in the world for you to confirm your story, let's say that you do see a past life, the only way you can prove it's true is to find information about it. But then the converse is, how do you prove to someone that is true, that you didn't research it first? So that was what my thinking was. So I didn't want to do it. And my boss was like, no, I want you to research reincarnation. So he made me call around, and I talked to a woman that I had worked with before who started doing these past life things. And really, there was half of me that was so busy that, when I called her, it was really interesting, and she offered to give me a free session to see what it was like. So I basically would go in there going, how long is this going to take? Partially. And then the other part was, wow, I've been obsessed by the Titanic all my life and have been creeped out by it in ways that I don't understand. So maybe I'm going to find something in there. that will. So I had a mixed feeling of like, let's get this over and maybe I can learn something.
All right, so Paul, then you weren't having any feelings or dreams or visions in your dreams about the Titanic, and maybe you were drowning or anything like that?
No, as a child I did. I had a real freaky incident that happened in the pool where I saw, it was the first time we were skinny dipping, and I started the book with it. We were skinny dipping, and I decided to hey guys, we need to turn off the lights. So I turned off the lights, and in that I saw this terrifying vision of me being in the water with a wall of steel with rivets on it, looming over me, like it's going to fall on me. And it totally freaked me out, and then it disappeared. So that was something that was happening to me, that had happened to me that I remembered. And then at the time, I went to see the Queen Mary and got sick on it when there's a part on that tour, because being fascinated by Titanic, there's a ship down the road that's 30 years after Titanic, and it's sort of a cool thing to see. So when I moved to LA, I went to that ship, and I got sick during the tour because we went outside, and literally they have a walkway that takes you under the ship and outside the ship so that you can see the propeller in the water. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at this thing going, oh my God, and I'm seeing the plates and the hull and the rivets, and I just completely get sick. So those were weird things that were happening to me, prior to this. And then seeing this regression, it made me understand it. I was like, oh shit, this is true. You've experienced this somewhere. This is why this is causing now. Ultimately, let's say this, it was a 12-year process for me to say that to you, because 12 years ago, I might have said, I don't know if it's true or not. I just know that it was freaky what I saw under the regression, and I needed to figure out whether it was true.
When they performed the past life regression on you, it was a 12-year process?
After that, yeah.
12-year process. And do you remember, after the past life regression, did you ask them the kind of questions that they asked you to bring you to the point where you had similar things happening to you that was happening on the Titanic?
Well, the first time that I did this regression, I was actually dipped into a life that wasn't the Titanic life at all. It was a life in the South Seas on an island with an islander who, it looked like he was involved in an island raid that went wrong, and he was being chased back to his boats, and he ended up being attacked, and I ended up getting speared, and it was an incredibly visual, detailed thing that I saw, and it tripped me out because it was so fantastical. And when the regression ended, my regressionist was like, do you want to see more of that life? There's something there that it wants to teach you. And I was creeped out because I felt like something bad was really going to happen to this guy. So I said no. And then she said, okay, well, let's just have your psyche take you where you need to go. And at that point, I saw the very ending of Titanic, his last view of the ship. And it was terrifying. I was in the water. It was freezing. There was this massive wall of rusty, dripping steel and the fear that this was going to come down on me was so intense that I just immediately blew out of the regression. I woke up just completely, and at that point I really didn't want to see anymore. I was like, this is scary. But what it said to me was, shit, that was the Titanic, and maybe you have memories of a life on it. And so the process for me was to find out if that was true or not. Did my psyche, was that my imagination, or did I see something that was real? It felt real, looked real. And so the 12 years was trying to figure out if it was real.
So how did the hypnotist get to you to bring out the Titanic information in you?
She didn't seem to. She just said, if I remember correctly, after she asked me, because the first life that I saw was just, and this came out of left field. I don't like the beach. beach. This was not wish fulfillment for me, but I saw this just very terrifying scene where this guy was being, chased by someone who ended up killing him. And, I was so freaked by that, I didn't want to see any more of that. She's like, clearly your subconscious wanted you to see this life. There's something you need to learn about this life. And I would like to get your permission to take you back to it. And I was like, no. I was like, no, this is scary. And then her response to that was like, okay, well, obviously your subconscious wants to show you something, and take it. So this all happened really quickly. I mean, like, I think my first regression, I probably spent about 10 seconds in the Titanic life and maybe about a minute and a half in the other life. But it was enough to make me go, I know I'm not making this up. This is three-dimensional real. Like it tripped me out, but it took me a while to figure out what I honestly felt about it.
All right. So what happened then? Do you believe that you might have been Jack, or you were just singing? Yeah. Okay. So listen, before we start, for those who may not know what's happening here, explain to the viewers about Jack, and he was also partnered up with Harold Bridge, but I have pictures of them. So explain to the viewers first about
sure,
Jack.
Sure. All right. So Jack Phillips was born in a small town south of London, and he ended up working his way up from a local postal worker to one of the premier radio operators aboard working for the White Star Line. And he was the senior operator on Titanic. I see you've got a picture of him there. He had a second officer named Harold Bride. And the two were fairly young. I think Harold Bride was 22. Jack had just turned 25, about 3 days before the collision with the iceberg. So he celebrated his 25th birthday on Titanic. Mm-hmm. And those guys were responsible for, people sometimes refer to the radio operators of Titanic as kind of like the computer nerds of this time, because, their job was communicating, and it was a brand new field. So they had to type Morse code. They sent with Morse code. It was all dots and dashes. And there were two services that they offered on the ship for Marconi. One was if rich passengers would send messages. So it was basically like a telegram. They called them Marconigrams. So they would send, hi, having a great trip, miss you, that type of thing. And then secondarily, they offered a service. The room itself was owned by the Marconi Company, who basically made the radios. So it was rented from the White Star, but they offered the White Star a service where captains could send messages to other captains. The information for the ship's newspaper could be taken down over the radio and then typed up in the purser's office. And, anytime there was a weather problem or a situation, those were kind of free messages for the White Star Line. So basically Jack's job was sending messages for rich people. And then, once the collision happened, he became very instrumental, both of them did, in saving the lives on Titanic. They ended up sending the distress call that was ultimately heard. Unfortunately, action came too late, and a lot of people died. But it wasn't because of their lack of nerve,
Mm-hmm. From what I read, the Californian was the closest to them, about 20 miles away. And then
even less probably.
And tell them what happened with the other fellow that was on the Californian.
It's an infuriating bit of Titanic history, and frankly, it still makes me mad. That ship didn't have a 24-hour officer. Titanic, obviously being a bigger ship, more expensive messaging. The Californian was like a cargo ship. So basically, they had one officer, and he didn't do a lot. And he didn't work 24 hours. So he went to bed. And the somewhat scandalous part, is that he tried to, he was asked by his captain to send a message to Titanic, informing them that the ship had stopped for ice that evening. And that it literally was surrounded, and they weren't moving. And the captain wanted Titanic to know that. And this guy, I could use some expletives. This guy did not send a message to Titanic in the way that the operators understood. They all were trained by the same company, and the rules of the company were you had to basically put a headline before. It's like a post with a headline, and the headline is to the captain of Titanic. In other words, you flag it when you send a message that it goes to him. He didn't. So he just basically started this gossipy message, and Jack thought it's just some loser interrupting my signal, and he told him to shut up. And then the guy went to bed.
And the Californian, didn't he turn off all his communication at his board?
He turned off his radio.
Yeah.
And then the captain got reports for the next 3 hours of white rockets coming from a ship that they could see from the deck. And this son of a gun did not, order the wake up of his Marconi guy to find out what was going on. And that was the difference maker. That ship could have, I know, there's a million geeks out there who plot out every iceberg and say, oh, this ice field was too big. He would have had to go around. He never could have saved anyone. I don't believe it. I mean, I saw that ship in my regressions from the deck, and I know for a fact it could have saved it. Yeah. So
yeah, it's said that the Californian could have saved everybody on the Titanic.
Yeah, and that's why, and Titanic gets a bad rap, or I should say the White Star Line does, because never when they conceived those lifeboats did they conceive a disaster like Titanic. Like, you'd have a flat ocean, and these boats that there'd be time to get everyone off the ship. It was always assumed that these ships would be trapped, would be in sight of each other, and no ship more than a half hour to 40 minutes away. So the reality was these lifeboats were for shuttling. They weren't for just offloading everybody. And that's what people don't understand. But after the Titanic disaster, they changed the laws and made it so that you had to have one for everybody.
All right, so now tell us about you and Jack.
So how I started looking at him was, after having this scary regression and feeling like I should say that hypnotic regression, my hypnotist said, when people do this, you kind of open up a pathway in your brain. So don't be surprised if just one day out of the blue, you're going to start seeing something else, another spontaneous image. So I was trying to kind of ignore it after it happened. And right before sleep one night, I saw a very intense, I felt like myself on the ship going down with the ship. And it was so detailed that it was like a falling dream where you're plunging into the water. I could see the bubbles, I could feel everything, and I was like, holy shit. So I realized that my subconscious kind of wanted me to pursue this. So basically, I just was like, well, there's only so many people on Titanic. If you were one of them, who could you be? And a movie had just come out. We were talking about potentially Walter Lord or The Night to Remember. A movie came out that was a British adaptation of it that had never been seen in America since the 50s. And so it was on video, and I was like, I'll watch it. And in watching the wireless scenes that were going into that whole the Californian stuff, I got so upset I started crying. I just was like, tears were pouring out of my eyes. And I'm like, why is that? It's curious. And you can see I was a little agitated even earlier talking about the Californian stuff. But it just made me so upset. And every time I watch the movie, I cry. I cannot watch that movie and not cry, even now. And I've seen it 7 times.
Oh yeah,
So basically, I was like, well, maybe, and I was thinking about it. I was like, you're a TV producer. If the same person with the same interests was born 100 years ago, it's not unreasonable to think that, you'd look for similar fields. And so I started looking into this guy, and, the more I looked, the more I was like, wow, this really could be me. There's a lot of parallels with our lives, and but even so, I was like, this is just wishful thinking, Paul. You're crazy, and I spent years of this project just saying it's rubbish. It's not true. And one day, it was on my birthday, this time of year when I turned 40, and this would have been in '03. I went to Florida, and we were celebrating my 40th, and I went to the Titanic Museum, and there's a photo there that was taken in the Titanic's wireless room, the Marconi room, and it looked exactly like me from behind, like exactly, like I was sitting in the chair, and it was such an out-of-body experience. It made me go, okay, so you cry at Titanic movies about the wireless and the sending of the SOS, and here you look just like the guy that it was. That picture that you're showing up there is actually from the Olympic, and he wasn't one of the guys. There's but I should have.
Well, how about this one? How about this one I'm posting? Was that from the Titanic? Those were the couple I could find.
Yeah, no, you might still have it. Sorry, I'm on mine's a time delay a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's 30 seconds.
Yeah. No, that's still the Olympic, and that's the same gentleman, it looks like. It's kind of a slightly different setup. You will see in the background of that photo, there's a window that, and that was one of the trippy things for me, actually, Noreen. You were saying, like, how did I think it was true? When I started doing these recreations, right, I'm seeing the Marconi room. I know it inside and out, and I know exactly where it is. And I thought, well, maybe you should check the Titanic blueprints just to see if it's right. And I saw that the Titanic was shown to have a window in the room that looked out over the deck. And I was like, no, that's wrong. So I must be wrong. I thought, you're crazy, you're making this all up. Well, then what I discovered later was that the Olympic had it that way, just like you showed in the picture. And the Titanic, between the time when the sister ship was built and the original ship, they moved the Marconi room to the center of the ship, right behind the elevator shaft. So it was down the corridor and around, just like I saw in my vision. So those were things that sort of convinced me along the way. Like basically, I started doing. I bought a downloadable. Once I was convinced that it was possibly real, I bought a recording that you could find online. It was a CD, and I put it into my iPod, and I would just listen to it. And it would guide me back through meditations, and bit by bit, I kind of saw his whole life. And finally, when I dealt with the Titanic stuff, which I saved to last because I felt it was really exploitative, I saw enough that I could really document that made me go, holy shit, this is totally true.
So tell us your experience then in your past life regression. And you remember all of this. Did you remember?
Yeah, I can see it. I don't think about it every day, but I can sort of easily tap back to it if I need to.
All right, so you were taken back. Were you just in the communication room as to where you were taken back at the end of his life, or were there other parts that you experienced?
No. Actually, the funny thing was, and this is the weird part for me, I guess, is that in addition to this whole kind of disaster, with he died with a lot of regrets. Not the least of which was blowing off that guy from the California, because he was well aware that he did that, and that lives were hanging in the balance because of it. But personally, he was having issues with his parents, and his parents were trying to get him to marry. And so his biggest regrets dying was that he had basically, as we would say, he had dissed his dad the last time he saw him. And for me, so much healing came when I saw his life, because he died with just lots of regrets. And, for me, once I saw that, I really stopped thinking about Titanic. I felt like I had seen what I needed, and this was a wonderful exercise. And I didn't even feel like finishing writing the story or even looking at what happened on Titanic in detail, because I felt like I had seen it. like it didn't matter. Like I had gotten the healing I wanted. So, however, I knew that wouldn't be a good story. So very late in the game, I started looking at the Titanic voyage. So yeah, I saw pretty much everything. I mean, Jack came early to the ship when it was still in Ireland. He helped put together the machines in the room. He was taught and trained how to connect everything. And I don't know, there's one part that a lot of people don't know is that he fixed the ship, that it failed the night of the disaster. 2 nights before the iceberg collision, it stopped working.
What stopped working?
The Marconi graph.
Oh.
And he and Bride most of the night trying to, like, piece by piece look at every part of that thing. And it's a real good thing that they did that, because if they didn't, they had a spare backup, like a record player sized, it was a much smaller contraption that they could have hooked up. But the trouble with that is that it only had a range of 50 miles. So if they were just lazy and were like, we'll fix this in New York, who cares? All of the people who were cast off in the boats could have died, because the SOS may never have gotten out. So those guys really are owed that.
In the communication room, there was Harold, Bride with Jack. Were the two of them in there at the same time?
Yes, they typically, the way that worked. First of all, they had a bunk room that was adjoining the Marconi room. So, and the thing is that technically they worked all day. Technically they worked. They had like 6 hours each off, basically, where it was kind of like 8 to 2, one had off, and the other had 2 to 8, like it was and typically, Jack was a little bit of a pain, because he liked to sleep in quiet, and where this room was is it sat right against the first class elevator shafts of Titanic. Now, and if you've seen the movie, you know that they had those caged elevators, and there were constant clanging of those things when they were working. They stopped working at 2 a.m. So Jack decided that he would sleep from 2 to 8 when they were off, and he made Bride sleep when they were at their busiest, probably in the evening. But because their schedule got thrown off because of the whole incident with it breaking down and Jack missing his sleep. So that's kind of why things progressed the way they did. But in either case, so they both had a room right next to them. And, they would go and have meals. The meals were down at they called it the postman's dining room. Like, basically, it was just them and the postal workers in this, functional room, and they had their meals served there on the ship. So they would go back and forth, but basically, and Jack would go out and have smokes on the deck. Their room was at the level of the lifeboat deck. Mm-hmm. So, when he would go down the corridor and out, he'd be looking right at a lifeboat. That's where they were on the ship.
Right, so the night that they struck ice,
yes.
Were they both in the communication room that night?
Yes. Jack was at the Marconi graph, and Bride was sleeping. I mean, he later, Bride pretty much woke up after the collision, and Jack was just finishing up. The collision happened something like 20 to midnight, and Bride was supposed to come on and relieve him at midnight. So Bride came out a few minutes early, and the collision had happened, and at that point, the engines were already off. Jack just felt a shudder, I mean, like, he barely knew anything had happened, but what he did notice was the turning off of the engines, because those engines were loud. And, when it was eerily silent, that's when he was like, oh, crap, what happened?
Did he discuss anything with Bride at their last moments, possibly on the ship?
No. Well, they both just took it seriously, like their roles in the last several hours where Jack stayed at the key he was continually broadcasting messages, and he was continually in both. The SOS was the brand new term that the Germans had created for a distress call. Prior to that, it was something different. So Jack did both, constantly alternating.
Well, what was Bride doing then?
And Bride was basically hanging on his every word, transcribing everything for the logbooks.
Oh.
The logbooks ended up getting disappeared, actually, that night, because, when they left the room, there was water coming down the hallway. So, and running messages back and forth. Like if they made contact with the new ship, let the captain know so that they could figure out where they were.
So in this communication room, there was only one of those machines. They didn't have like a couple of them where each of them could be sending out messages. There was only one?
No, because actually on those machines, and it's really hard to imagine, but think of it as like AM radio with one station.
Oh.
So when only one person can broadcast at time on these channels. Now, there were a couple other channels that were dedicated to, say, like news. There was a news channel where you could tune to and then get the day stuff for the newspapers for the ships. But in terms of the main communication channel, there was just one. So people had to, just like on a radio where it's like you say, what's your 20 over, that there's a protocol to how you use a single channel system, and that was developed for them. So only one person could be on the radio.
Go ahead. Okay, so when Captain Smith was it Captain Smith? He came to them. Did he come to them and tell them, okay, that's it, every man for himself?
He did. I mean, he basically. And Jack didn't want to go. I mean, Jack, I don't want to say he didn't want to go. He was fixated on reaching that ship that wouldn't answer. He was obsessed with that. And he didn't really necessarily want to hear it when it was released. And it took Harold noticing that the water was coming down the hallway and that they would soon be underwater. That really made him act and leave. And there was an incident that happened right before he left. It was a few minutes before that. I'm sorry, a few minutes before they left, but after the captain had released him, where a seaman from below, a crewman, a fireman as they would call him, a stoker, had come up and tried to steal Jack's light belt, which was over the back of his chair. And basically Bride and he got into a punching contest and ended up knocking him out. So when they left the Marconi room, this guy was splayed out on the floor, So that was another one of Jack's regrets. But he was just very angry.
And they left. Did he leave that communication room?
Yeah, they don't know. They ran out, and he was still in there. That was probably the hardest thing about that voyage for me to grapple, seeing that and understanding why. And the why is that Jack was, he wasn't perfect, but he blamed this guy for the fact that, and this is another thing that people typically don't know about the Titanic story, is that there was a huge, a huge strike of the coal workers, that the coal workers in all of England were on strike when Titanic went. And so the crew was made up of people who didn't mind sort of scabbing. And because they were all on strike, there was no stores. So basically, normally in the North Atlantic, you would have no more than a half hour between ships. Like the Titanic disaster couldn't have happened except for the fact that the ocean was empty. And it was empty because the strikers had, and so Jack had an issue with that. He felt that labor, that he'd been inconvenienced in his life by these labor strikes that were happening. And, had seen some really ugly behavior among union workers. So whereas I'm very liberal, he was much more conservative than me. So he had an issue with them. And he blamed the stoker for the fact that they were selfish and greedy. And that's why people were going to die. So when this guy is trying to steal his life belt, he was furious. I mean, he just unloaded on this guy. And that was bad. But you have to know this, is that the ship was sort of at this angle, and Harold was holding the guy back. And Jack was pushing downhill when he punched him. So it was sort of a combined effort. You know how when two opposing forces are hitting something at the same time, it was like boom, and that's what happened. And the guy gets knocked out, and he ends up on the floor. And neither of them gave a crap enough to say, they basically ran out of the room, because they were just like, hey, that was his problem. He was stupid. He was a thief.
And then, So what do you remember the last? Okay, so that was the end of that guy, and they, both of them were still in that room. And what happened then when the water started coming onto their level of the ship?
Well, and Jack was terrified that the ship was going to sink while he was in it, because he had a little bit of a way to go. And the other part is that he was injured at that point. He had, in this fight that he had with the stoker, he had broken his hand. He had broken at least one, if not two, of his fingers in that punch. So he had trouble getting down the hallway, and he was just terrified that the ship was going to sink and they wouldn't be able to get out. But they ended up getting out onto the deck. Now, as I said previously, when you come out of the deck from the officers' quarters where they were, typically you would see one of the lifeboats. But the lifeboats had all been launched. And the reality was the ship did not have permanent railings along the areas of the boat deck where the lifeboats were. So what happened was they had these boats sitting there basically and no railing. And they had temporary railings that were put up in general times. So that night, they took down all the temporary railings. So this guy gets out, and he has nowhere where he can go. There's a foot of water, and he's looking, and you could see the black water, coming at you, and there's nowhere to hold on to. There's nothing to go. So he and his partner end up climbing above where they worked, and it's there that they find some crewmen who are trying to free a lifeboat. There's one last, on that side of the ship, there's one last lifeboat. It was a collapsible sort that had canvas sides, and it was lashed down, but whoever lashed it down didn't make it easy for them to get it out, and they needed to cut it. And basically, the crewmen asked Jack and Bride to help. Jack was not in a position to help because of his hands, so he ended up walking back up the ship to get away from it, and Bride helped, and that boat ended up floating off the ship, and that's why Harold Bride survived the disaster.
Well, what
but
happened?
Jack did not.
Oh, so Jack wasn't able to get on that boat?
No. He couldn't help them. He couldn't help them, and at that point, he just wanted to get to higher ground. He was wet, his hands were wet, and so he was struggling. And there was a railing on that roof, so he was basically working his way back to try to get to the back of the ship, and he felt that he couldn't help the guys.
What were Jack's last moments that you remember?
So he. Okay, do you want me to jump ahead, or do you want me to tell you all right, so he ends up in the water. I mean, basically, he's about halfway up the ship, maybe between a third and a half towards the back, struggling when the ship finally goes down. The front of the ship basically goes down like a rocket, and he's pulled underwater, and he hangs onto the railing. And once the suction disappears, because he's just feeling like he's being pulled backwards, and once that lessens, he lets go and drifts up. He has the mistake of coming up underneath someone. There's a woman in the water with very long, as you know, back then, people had all these long dresses and petticoats. And so he ended up underneath this woman and, ended up contacting her in inappropriate parts. But the bottom line is he was just trying to breathe. And, when he does resurface and he realizes that he's under this woman, he turns away and he sees the back half of the ship, which is separated, and it scares him, the walls in front of him. So he swims as best and as hard a way as he could from it. And then at that point, he's like thinking, I mean, he's sort of out of his mind. He's frozen. And he's looking around for the light of the California. He's like, maybe I can swim to it. You know, like he hasn't given up the idea of helping. But once the back of the ship sinks and everyone's screaming, it's just really terribly depressing and horrifying. And he's getting colder by the minute. So, you know, he ends up basically saying a lot of prayers. And, you know, what I felt was him getting warm, bizarrely. Like, the more prayers he said near the end, the warmer he got. Like, he felt like, it almost felt like he was just burning up. And, you know, when I realized that when you get hypothermia, that's an often weird byproduct of it, is that people's nerves short circuit. And so they think they're warm. Oh. So someone is trying to give them blankets to heat them up, and they're throwing them off because they're burning up. But that was really the last experience, was him kind of burning up. And I came out and saw his face. And one thing that I can share probably is that, you know, when I finally saw when I first saw that, the regression where I saw like most of his life and got the big chunks out, when I came out, the last image I saw him was he was like this. He was slumped in his life jacket, and the life jacket was sort of sticking up. I mean, you know, like Joan Crawford shoulders, you know, yeah, but higher. And they were white, and it was weird. And I wrote that down in my journal, that his head slumped down, but his things went out. And then when I was trying to verify, like, well, what did the Titanic bodies look like? I discovered that that happened with all of them, and that they actually referred to them as seagulls, because you could see the white, you know, of the, you know, the straps of the life belts on the water. So the guys who were pulling the bodies up referred to them as seagulls. Mm. So that, to me, I thought was, wow, you know, that's exactly what I wrote in my journal. You know.
And because you have some paranormal gifts now, has Jack ever tried to communicate with you, or you try to communicate with Jack?
Yes. Actually, yes. And I'm going to save that for, well...
Oh, come on!
No, I'll tell you. No, I'll tell you, Dory. It's great. Yeah, you know, because here's the thing. Looking at his life, I saw certain things about myself. Like, I realized why that I did like he did. I grew up in Mass, moved to California. He grew up in New England and was traveling the world. You know, a lot of parallels. But I realized that I was sort of I'd call home every week. I talked to Mom all the time. Like, for me, I was pathological about making sure my parents knew that I loved them, you know? And that was something that was a reaction to his life. So I felt like he had shown me so much, you know, that I wanted to return the favor. So at one point I did a meditation, and I showed him my life. And it was extreme. Like, I felt like if I could see his life, then, and I truly believe that time is not what we think it is. I think Einstein's right. I think that all time exists for, like, my explanation for being able to tap into his life and see it like a 3D movie is that time is immaterial, you know? So yeah, so I did. I reached out to him. I showed him stuff, and I don't know if he believed it or not, but at the end, I think he did believe it. You know, it was really a trip. I was my partner and I had gone up to the desert. We were taking pictures of Joshua trees and scrambling over boulders, and I just got this idea, like, hey, you know, Jack made you fear death, you know, stop fearing death. And why don't you return the favor? Why don't you show him your life? So I did. I kind of showed him cars, you know, modern trains, buildings. You know, I basically gave him a running commentary of my life, and you know, and it was an amazing sunset that night too. It was all perfect. And I basically was like, so you're gonna see other sunsets, man. Yeah.
Wow.
So
somebody was asking about his name, and his name was Jack Phillips.
Yeah.
Right, Jack Phillips.
Yeah, John George Phillips, but Jack was his preferred name. You know, everyone called him Jack.
And there's a sister ship. What was the sister ship?
You mean Titanic ship?
Yeah.
The sister ship? There were actually two sister ships to Titanic. Olympic was one. Olympic was the first that was built. And Jack saw that too in his life. He saw Olympic, was very impressed by it, never worked on Olympic. And after Titanic, the third sister that was being built at that time, they shut down, as you can imagine. They didn't know why Titanic had failed. Like, the ship was supposed to be unsinkable, and they didn't understand how the rivets had separated and all that. Mm-hmm. So they basically did a big redesign of the third ship, and it was supposed to be called Gigantic. And they basically were like, no. And they named it Britannic. So they felt like Gigantic was like Titanic, like it was sort of tempting fate. Mm. And Britannic had a career, but it was either in World War I or World War II. I think it was World War I. It was a troop ship. It was helping the British Army, and it was sunk. So that one went down like Titanic too. It's on the bottom on its side because it basically sank in shallow water and fell over. Olympic had a very, very, very long career, and it was in the 50s where it was dismantled. So literally that was the one of the three sisters that didn't, come to a bad end.
Now, did Jack have any guilt at all?
He had a terrible guilt, yeah, about blowing off the guy from the California, yeah. I mean, but he felt that he had a reason to, Like, he felt like, well, I mean, and maybe I'm like this too in some ways. You sort of pride yourself on your competency, and he felt like this guy was a screw up. Like, what are you doing? If you have an important message from my captain, and you have the nerve to basically be like, hey, dude, we've got some ice here, which is, I mean, that isn't exactly what he said, but it's kind of the idea. When there's a protocol, you're supposed to say, this message is for the captain of the Titanic. They had a code called MSG, and which nowadays MSG is horrible because we think of the additives from Chinese food, but back then it was Master Service Grade, and it just meant that it was to the captain of the ship, And this guy didn't do that. He didn't do the MSG. He didn't give a crap, and so Jack felt like so much could have been avoided if this guy had done his job, and he blamed him, but he blamed him only because he felt like he should have, he shouldn't have assumed the guy knew what he was doing, and he should have asked questions. So he really regretted being short with him.
What was his last message from the Titanic that Jack put out?
Well, it's hard to tell. Well, I mean, truthfully, the last thing that he tried to type, and it's funny, because my memories do conflict with some theories that are out there right now. But the last message, he was trying to send SOS again. And he had broken his finger. And the thing is that the way that you had to hold down the Marconi graph, you basically had to, you manipulate your hands around a knob. There was a knob on it. Think of it as like a stapler with a knob on the end. And you basically had to put your fingers around the knob and push down. Like, that's how you manipulated that thing. And he couldn't, pressing his fingers against the knob actually hurt him. He couldn't do it. So his last message out was trying to send an S, but he ended up only sending a couple dots. Like, it was, and some people have theorized, like, the ship, I guess, Virginia, heard those last notes, and they thought that it was that they were trying to basically adjust the tuning, that they were losing power and were doing some adjusting of the antenna. Wow. That's what that theory is, but that's not what I saw. What I saw is he had broken his fingers and he was trying to communicate, and couldn't. So.
All right, we have a couple of questions from the viewers.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And by the way, guys, I'm sorry. I don't have my glasses on, so I haven't really been able to pay attention to the questions.
All right, here we go. Beat 3 Airspace. Paul, have you tried to check on any relatives of Jack's that are living?
Yes, and what I understand is, well, he had two sisters and they both died and they never had kids. So there was a cousin, I believe, like a relative of a cousin who passed away, I think, right before the centennial. I haven't gone any further than that because I felt like it was just so sad. Like there were no obvious people around that could confirm the personal stuff for me, but I saw enough evidence in other ways to make me think it was true. And and I don't know, maybe part of me was scared, but I did look at his family and discovered they weren't around.
All right. From Chippeterry, do you feel that William Murdoch committed suicide, or is that just a rumor?
I don't think Will did that. I mean, and to tell you the truth, he Jack didn't know him very well, but from what Jack knew of him, he wouldn't do it. He was very straight up. And that whole business of him trying to blackmail, like in the movie Titanic with Cal trying to give him money and everything, that didn't happen. He was way more straight than that. Jack's really good friend on the ship was Jim Moody. And they had a bit of a to-do. And there was another aspect, too, about, one of the ice warnings. I won't go into that. But yeah, that's in the book. But him and Jim had a spat at the end. But those guys were really close. But what he knew about Will, no. Will wouldn't have done that.
Okay. From Nicole Jacobs, what are your feelings on removing items from the wreckage?
Oh, I mean, I hate to say it. Jack, that was a scare. The stuff that I saw scared me to hell. That wreck cannot be gone soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I do think it's grave robbing in one way, but on the other way, it's I don't know, I don't know. That the wreck is kind of a scary place to me. So, as far as I'm concerned, that if you leave it be, it's all going to be disintegrated in a few years anyway. And I do get the arguments about people's stuff, and I'd be pissed if they find Jack's shaving bag. I'd be like, what is this? But yeah, no, I think it should all be left alone, and I think that the sea should take it, and and we shouldn't worry about that thing again for a while.
All right. Well, that's Anita Ackerman wanted to know how you felt about them possibly raising the Titanic.
I remember as a kid when I read that book, I thought that was so cool. I don't think it would be possible. And from what I've read recently, I mean, since I wrote the book, I have like a Facebook author page, and I've been just sort of Googling now Titanic news just to share on that page. And I didn't realize it, but like in 20 years, those upper decks are going to be gone. That the ship is that corroded.
Oh,
and
yeah.
by the end of by 2100, they say that it's going to just be like a rust stain on the bottom of the ocean. So I don't believe the ship has the integrity to be raised, from what I know.
Shame. I wonder, when I forget his name who found it.
Robert Ballard.
Wasn't there any way possibly that they could have brought it up into pieces and then put it maybe in the Smithsonian Institute and put it together somehow?
I don't know. Well, it's funny, you know what? That exact question was asked. If you go to my author page, there was an interview done by Peter Jennings with Dr. Robert Ballard, just like a week after he found the wreck. It was done by radio when he was still at the site, and he was asked that. Is there any possibility that you guys can raise this wreck? And he's like, absolutely not with the technology they have. I do know the people, the salvagers of it, put up got a big wall-sized chunk of it. Like they did get some siding of it. I saw it when it came to LA, so that exists. But when you think about it, you'd have to really dig deep. Like they don't even have the technology right now to dig up around the Titanic to actually see the iceberg damage. Like all of the theories that they have, there's just theories. Like they don't have the technology to like 4 miles, 5 miles down to dig up the ship, even just to look for the damage. So the idea of being able to lift it up that distance and sort of cocoon it, by the time they do that technology, the ship will be rust.
Yeah, what a shame. All right, we have one last question from ML Abunda 61. Paul, you seem to have really embraced all of your experience. Are you grateful to have had it?
I am totally grateful for that. I really am. I think it helped me most when like my mom passed a couple years ago, because I believe fully I will see her again. I believe fully. Like, there's a reason why I'm seeing Jack's life, and it means that. And if I probably had the cojones, as they say, I would try to look at a future life, just to prove it. And someone has challenged me to that, and I may do it. But yes, I am super grateful, because, like, if it's true, right, and we have past lives, well, what are we worried about any of it? Like even the most tragic human story, if it's sort of like, okay, I go a little while again and I come back more or less the same person.
Do you believe that you've had other past lives?
Yeah, the native whom I saw in my very first regression, along with that image of Jack's life, I have been working on a book about his life, because I only saw a very brief story of him in that original thing, but now I've really seen it, and he was like a healer, kind of a medicine man in his community. So I'm learning about ancient healing techniques that I hope to share in the book.
Are.
So
Oh
yeah,
my
I'm
gosh.
doing that, energy healing stuff, and he's teaching me some other stuff.
So are you continuing with these past life regression appointments?
With him now, most of the stuff I've done on like my recordings. So I still have an old iPod, and I just play this wonderful. And I have to give a shout out. It's in the book. A wonderful recording by a woman named Mary Elizabeth Raines is really what helped me see all this. Now, and I have friends who have tried it and have been like, God, it didn't do the breakthrough for me. The encouragement that I would give to anyone who wants to do this is that there are a lot of great recordings out there, and you got to try them, because Elizabeth worked great for me, and if it works for you, it's fantastic. Other people have breakthroughs with other people, so but yeah, I'm using her tapes, and I am looking at the life of this native right now.
Wow.
When I can.
Wow. Well, let's see, everybody, you can find his website, Paul's website, at www.themantwhosentthesos.com. There's a lot of information on that page. Also, I have that information on the bottom of this video that you can read as well. And gosh, Paul, I want to thank you so much. And you know what? I wish you all the best with your book. I'm hoping maybe someday they'll make a movie out of it. That would be awesome.
Wow, well that, who knows, maybe they will, but I think there's already been a pretty great Titanic movie made, so I wouldn't be disappointed.
But yours would be a different story, where you could talk about the reincarnation and because a lot of people, this is the first I've heard of somebody having the reincarnation of someone that was on the Titanic, and you could give a lot of insight on their feelings and what was happening. And we don't always get that, so that what you have is something special, and we totally enjoyed that tonight. And
I'm really happy to be here.
I want to thank you so much. And let me know.
Thanks for watching.
Oh, yeah, you know what? And you know what? Keep me informed, because if anything ever happens with this book and your story, please let me know. I would love to be informed. And when you can, send me the link to your Facebook page. And tell everybody. What is
Definitely.
it?
All right, you guys, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a happy new year and much success to you, Paul. Thank you.
Same to you, Noreen.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Good night. Thank you so much. Good night.
Okay.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining the show tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I love stories like this, and I absolutely love the Titanic. And I've never had a guest before that's had a past life regression. So I hope you all had a great new year. Let me do some fast shout outs next week. And Paul is wonderful. Don't forget, you can buy his book, go to his website, and he's also on Facebook. So, and I have the information underneath this video for his website. So, everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I've got another great show, not next week, but the week after, a Barry Strom, who does channeling on a spirit board. And he has some interesting information to pass with to us, and who he's communicated, and talks about conspiracies. But I'm going to get in touch with him because there's a couple of cases I would like him to channel for us, and that is the Keddie Resort murders, and possibly John Bonet and a couple of others. I know he's written a book, and he has his own information in his book, and he was gonna also on our show, he was gonna pass along some information that's not in the book, but I'm not sure, like the conspiracy on JFK, Buddy Holly, a singer from the 50s, there was some kind of conspiracy with him, but I'm going to ask him if he would also do some other things for us, because I would really, really like to know about the Keddie Resort murders. It's been haunting me since I found out about it. That was an unsolved case from 1981. So everybody, thanks so much. Let me do some fast shout outs, okay? Also, I want to thank my mods, especially to Royce Hinman, who's been really ill, and he needs your prayers. So everybody, please pray for Royce. He's here every week, every show without fail, and there's times he just doesn't feel good, but he comes to the show, and he's a mod, and Crystal Triplet as well. She's here, and Annie must have had something to do tonight, sweet Annie, unique Annie. But we really need to give a big hug and thanks to Royce and to Crystal. And don't forget, give your prayers, please, to Royce. So let's do some fast shout outs. Oh my. All right, Lisa Marie, Nicole Jacobs, Zippy Davis, Zoe Small, Chipateri, Miller, Aaron Brody, Bethany Warner, B3 Airspace. Oh, Annie had connection issues. Crystal Triplet, Little Wolf Minecraft, X Group Home Kid, Joy Fitch, Zippy Davis, Shelties Hangrilla, Janet Wolf, Jessica Luna, Jimmy Cortez. Hi, honey. Nice to see you. Hope all is going well with you. Nebet Seta, Charmy Charms, Susie Farrell, Miller, River. Hi, River. Kelly Dahl. Anybody else want to shout out? We had a nice big group tonight. Vicki Lawrence. Cassandra 50. Hey, honey. Haven't seen you for a while. Love you too. Bethany Warner. Anybody else want to shout out? We had a real nice crowd tonight. Thank you so much for being here. This was a great show. I was so excited. My first show for the year. And we've got some other really, really great shows coming up. Maggie Murray. Paraprincess Patricia. Wave, everybody. Big hugs to everybody. Spirit Walking Callie. Thank you. All right, everybody. Paranormal Pixie 78, Sandra Miller, Jessica Luna. Okay, guys, I'm going to go. My husband's waiting for me. Have dinner. And don't forget to please subscribe. And please give the show a like. Marie Amador, Sandra Amador, thank you. Anita Eckerman. Yeah, Uncle Vinny. Oh, let's see. Michael Nelson, Haunted Roads Media. Oh, hi, Mike. Hey everybody, Haunted Roads Media. It's Mike Ricksecker. He has a show on Tuesdays with Vanessa Hogel, Under the Rabbit Hole on YouTube. Great show. Vanessa will be here the last Thursday of January, and we're going to be doing our unsolved murders and mysteries. I can't wait. Anybody else? Tammy Heltzman. Oh, and also my Carl White. I know Carl White's out there. He's always here for every show. Hi, Carl. Do a shout out to Carl. I know you're here. Thank you, Sandra. Yes, Mike's a good friend, and he's got a great show as well. All right, everybody, I'm going to go. Love you guys. Happy New Year. Much happiness and health to all of you. And thank you so much for being here, and I love all you guys. Thank you. And again, there you are. Oh, my God. See, I knew Carl. I knew you were there. So, everybody, I'll see you not next Thursday, but the Thursday after for another great show. And please stop by Paul's web page and stop by his Facebook page. Okay. Thank you. Good night, everybody. I love you. Thank you so much.